The president's tax reform plan is set to take effect in 2018, but the benefits are already being seen. Corporations are giving bonuses, promising wage increases, and planning to expand. As Gary Lane shows us, taxpayers can still take steps this year to lighten their tax load.
When President Trump signed the new tax bill into law, he expressed confidence that Americans will like it once they start receiving larger paychecks next year. Some Democrats argue the new tax law will only benefit corporations and the wealthy. But the Tax Policy Center says 91% of middle-income Americans will receive a tax cut in 2018. That revelation even pleased Socialist Senator Bernie Sanders.
It is a very good thing, and that's why we should have made the tax breaks for the middle class permanent.
The individual tax cuts are temporary and will expire within 8 years if Congress does not act to make them permanent or extend them. Former Oklahoma Senator Tom Coburn says he thinks the new tax law will do remarkable things for the U.S. economy.
There isn't a tax bill that's ever been passed that everybody likes. But in the long run, this is going to be very, very beneficial in terms of job creation, in terms of raising wages for middle-income and lower-middle-income families.
Already, Wells Fargo and Fifth Third Bancorp say they're raising the minimum wage at their companies to $15 per hour. Boeing, Comcast, and AT&T are giving their employees bonuses, and they're promising to spend billions to expand their businesses nationwide. Some taxpayers in higher tax states are jamming local offices to prepay next year's property taxes so they can get a bigger deduction this year. Next year, the allowed deduction for combined property and local income taxes is capped at $10,000. The president and many members of Congress wanted the cap because they felt it was unfair for Americans in states where taxes are lower to subsidize people in higher tax states like California and New York. As for charitable deductions, they're still allowed for people who itemize their taxes, but the doubling of the standard deduction to $24,000 for married couples and $12,000 for singles means more people are likely to forego itemizing their taxes next year. CBN's Executive Director of Planned Giving says if people intend to do that, they still have time to help their favorite charities this year.
If this year you're itemizing deductions, and next year it appears you're going to end up taking the standard deduction because of the increase, you can push forward some of your charitable giving that you had planned for 2018 into 2017, but you got to do it by year end.
Gary Lane, CBN News.
Republican Roy Moore is trying to stop Alabama from certifying Democrat Doug Jones as the winner of the U.S. Senate race, and he's filed a lawsuit. Jones defeated Moore by about 20,000 votes. However, the lawsuit alleges potential voter fraud. Moore's attorney says there should be a fraud investigation and eventually a new election. Secretary of State John Merrill is set to certify the results of the election Thursday. Just weeks before the vote, Moore was hit with allegations claiming he had sexually abused teenagers. Moore denies those allegations. Israel is moving forward with plans to extend train service from Tel Aviv to the Western Wall. The new station will be named after President Trump. Israel's transportation minister says the decision to name their train station after the president is because of his brave and historic decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The project will bring passengers within walking distance of Judaism's most revered sites. Still ahead, here on CBN Newswatch, they gave up their careers, moved halfway around the world. See what brought these doctors to a remote part of Kenya. In 2010, Eric Hansen gave up a lucrative medical career in America. He packed his bags and moved his wife and 4 children 8,000 miles from their home in Texas. Now they live in a remote part of Africa where he serves as a Christian missionary doctor. George Thomas brings us his inspiring story from Kenya.
Pada siku mbili tutitumpira, okay? Sawa.
Dr. Eric Hansen didn't speak Swahili before he moved to Kenya. In fact, he and his family never planned on living on the African continent at all.
My wife actually asked me when we were dating if I was going to be a long-term cross-cultural missionary, and I said no, and that was the right answer. So it was a little bit of a bait and switch. What brought us here 7 years ago was really God changing our heart.
The Hansens moved from Texas to Kenya, specifically to work at Kijabe Hospital, which is about an hour outside the capital city of Nairobi.
Where are things with you? Are you okay? Are you ready? Okay, so can we...
Hansen is the lead pediatric surgeon at Kijabe. By definition, he's a missionary doctor, but the definition is changing.
The model of the past, where mission hospitals were staffed almost exclusively by expatriate missionaries, is maybe relevant in some places, but increasingly not the best model. And I think that as we train, as the Kenyan staff here at Kijabe grows, half the physicians are African here.
Scrub team, we have Muredi, Francis, Kimani's here also, and then we have students. Okay.
If that means that in 10, 15, 20 years, I'm not needed here, that's fantastic. But if I am, that's fine too.
To better appreciate the services provided by these Christian hospitals, you just need to look at the numbers. For example, here in Kenya, 40% of the medical services are actually provided by these Christian hospitals. If he were simply a surgeon, Hansen could perhaps treat hundreds of children each year, but as a teacher, the reach is far greater.
Training these people who will go out and train others, we're talking about tens of thousands of children. That's more than I could ever do in a lifetime. I think it's a great testimony to the love of Christ.
Well, we try to put the names of all the children next to over their heads, and just let them know that they're loved.
Every opportunity we get to care for someone is an opportunity to be love.
It's a sentiment shared by many at the hospital, including Chief Surgeon Dr. Peter Bird.
So I might be very good at taking appendix out, but someone like Mercy or other pastors are really good at just sharing the gospel. That's critical. You can't just be populating hell with all these people with excellent hernia repairs. You've got to be actually doing more than that.
Twice each day, doctors, staff, and patients have the opportunity to attend services at the campus chapel.
Because of what he did about 2,000 years ago, he's still speaking life to each and every one of us.
Still, the challenges here can be great. And there are everyday life challenges living abroad.
Hello.
The question is on the way.
Hello.
You know, we don't always have running water. That can be frustrating. Electricity is generally reliable.
Muredi. Hey, good morning.
What?
Do you know where the sugar is?
I put it over by the coffee machine, I thought.
Yeah.
There are days I think I could pack up and we could live a different life somewhere else.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we wouldn't trade this life for anything. Big picture, we're happy here. We have a sense of purpose, a sense of calling.
I think the challenges that we have here ultimately pale in comparison to the opportunities that we have.
There's the epiglottis, okay? It's a privilege to be able to operate on anybody. From a surgeon standpoint, it's a cool case. From the patient standpoint, we hope we can really help the child and the family. And then from a training standpoint, it's key.
Hansen and Bird could easily make 6 figures in their home countries.
Where I come from, Australia, there are many surgeons. They don't need another surgeon there, really.
Instead, they have chosen a different life, a different calling, with its own unique rewards.
Living here, we feel like we've hit the lottery.
It's about obedience, it's about, you know, love, hopefully response and love, and loving other people that are my trainees, but also my colleagues and also the patients. So let me say a prayer for Moby. God in heaven, we pray for your mercy. I thank you for the chance to take care
George Thomas, CBN News, Kijabe, Kenya.
Now, Dr. Hansen's hospital will be one of 8 teaching hospitals to benefit from a new CBN initiative. It's called the African Mission Healthcare Foundation. CBN is partnering with Jewish philanthropists Erica and Mark Gerson for this. We've launched a campaign to raise $1 million to fund 8 teaching hospitals in Africa, and they're matching up to $1 million. If you'd like to join this effort, you can find more at cbnnews.com. Up next, we are continuing our conversation with Fox and Friends host Brian Kilmeade on the life and faith of Andrew Jackson. Stay with us. We're coming right back. Journalist Brian Kilmeade is a big history buff, and he's shining a light on the life of Andrew Jackson in his latest book titled Andrew Jackson and the Miracle of New Orleans. Here's part 2 of my conversation with the author and Fox and Friends co-host. I love what you tell about Jackson's early years. There are things I did not know.
Right.
from the advice that his mom gave him. Did that stuff surprise you? How did you uncover?
Well, put it this way, I did not know how bad things were for him, and how little he used it as an excuse to not be all he can in life. Now, people say, well, the Trail of Tears, how can you look at Andrew Jackson? Well, Andrew Jackson had slaves. Absolutely. Can't justify either one of them. But I can't put myself 200 years ago and say, I want you to do exactly like I think you should have done. I think that's the arrogance of a generation. But back to your original question. What if I told you that you'll be in the backwoods of America, an unsettled land, and your dad would die before you're born, and your mom would be left with 3 kids under, I think, the age of 8, and have to make her way without any discernible skills? She does. And when the war breaks out, a very patriotic Jackson family knew they had to fight. And the older brother would die immediately in battle from heat stroke. The other brothers, all of 13 and 14 years old, would contribute any way they could as a scout and running errands. And they got caught. And when they got to the house of a family friend, they wreck the house of the friend, they get these 2, and they say, clean my shoes because I had to walk through mud to get to you. And Jackson said, no, I don't think so. I'm a prisoner of war. And out comes the big sword crashing down on him. He puts his hand up to block it. He would have the scars on his head and hand his entire life. His brother was not as quick. The blow lands. He would never fully recover from the head injury, no medical attention, as they march miles to a prisoner of war camp. Well, the mom was relentless. I'm going to get my kids out. But by the time they got him out, they were released without any shoes, walked 40 miles through horrible conditions in the winter. But when the brother arrived, he never recovered. He'd pass away. It was just Andy and the mom. So the mom says, I got to go earn money and help our relatives through this horrible war. And the only reason he finds out his mom dies is because her stuff arrives in a trunk. So he's orphaned at 13 years old. Every excuse to be a criminal and a vagrant. Instead, he said, I'm determined to matter. He starts realizing that everyone is teaming up to raise him, from his town, from his families, from his relatives, to his county, to his state, to his country. And I believe he bled red, white, and blue because of that. I mean, to fight at 13, you got to love this country. To want to give back your entire life, you really got to love your country. And what does this orphan do? Become a lawyer, an attorney general, a congressman, a senator, a major general, and a 2-term president. And I think that people can look back 200 years ago and say that's the American dream, right? That's the reason why we come. We don't say we're all equal, but we have the opportunity to have pursuit of happiness and success. He was determined to matter. And all these years later, he still matters. We're debating on his statue. I'm sure he'd be happy about that. The fact that Ronald Reagan, Harry Truman, FDR, Teddy Roosevelt, and Lincoln said, that's the president I want to emulate and study, that goes beyond me. Those guys are too famous, too successful, and too laudable. If they think Jackson is worth studying, I could at least study the battle that made us famous, and that's the Battle of New Orleans.
And tomorrow, Brian is sharing the signs of Andrew Jackson that can still be seen today in the city of New Orleans. Stay with us. We're coming right back. A New York City pastor has found a unique way of getting to know hundreds of his neighbors. His inspiration came from a Peanuts comic. Reporter Caitlin Burke brings us his story.
Each Tuesday on a New York City street corner, a booth goes up, Pastor Gregory Fryer sits down, and the crowd streams by.
I have been pastor of this church for 25 years, but I have learned that it's easier to meet people if I simply sit on the street corner.
His bright yellow booth is a tribute to an old comic. Some people get the reference, others not so much. Either way, Pastor Fryer makes it work.
All kinds of people stop by, and they all seem to stop by with goodwill. But sometimes people sit down on my booth and they burst into tears. We all have our hopes and dreams and sorrows and setbacks. And my job is to listen as carefully as I can and then to speak back words of encouragement by talking about Jesus.
When you sit on the street corner as often as Pastor Fryer does, your community starts to notice. That's why he started this whole thing in the first place, to let people know he's available for them.
The church itself, it's beautiful. I love it with all my heart, but it's a little bit intimidating to people on the outside. That's what I'm afraid of. So I simply sit there in this kind of humble booth. If we save only one soul, it'll be worth it.
As for the 5-cent charge, the church provides your fee. Still, many drop in some coins or a few bucks to help in the cause.
I think it's because they like the idea. They like the idea of the pastor being available, even if they themselves don't feel the need for the pastor.
From the corner of 88th and Lexington in New York City, I'm Caitlin Burke.
Beautiful story. The Peanuts comic inspiring, sharing the gospel. Well, right now it is time for your Thursday Thankful. And today I hope you'll join me in this prayer of gratitude. Father, thanks for allowing me to see the close of another year. You have been faithful even when I have not been. You are indeed a great God. Now with that prayer, be sure to make this a thankful Thursday. That will do it for this edition of CBN Newswatch. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, you can always find more exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. And we'd love to hear what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can reach out and touch us anytime on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make this a thankful Thursday. We'll see you right back here come tomorrow. Goodbye and God bless.